In this experiment, I'm slathering briskets with mustard, mayonnaise, soy sauce, and oil before applying the rub, and we're gonna see if these binders do anything or whether you should just skip binders altogether, so let's get smoking. Welcome to the Smoke Lab. I'm Steve Gao, and in this show I do crazy barbecue experiments you would never do at home so you can learn from my trial and error. Do binders actually do anything? I remember getting into barbecue and hearing all sorts of crazy theories and opinions on whether or not you should use binders. I think I was watching Aaron Franklin's masterclass years ago, and I saw him applying mustard to a pork butt before he put the rub on it, and he says that the pork butt shrinks up and the mustard forms a crust that doesn't shrink as much, so it ends up forming a better bark and crust, and I was like, well, that sounds great. I'm gonna use mustard on everything from now on. So I used mustard on brisket and pork butt and ribs, but after a while I started experimenting with just slathering my briskets with water and using that as a binder, and it turned out just as good as with the mustards, so that confused me a little bit. And then I saw other influencers like Malcolm Reed using stuff like Italian dressing as a slather before they put the rub on the meat, which sounds actually really tasty. I want to test that out, but that's for a different video. There's all sorts of recommendations out there on what type of slather or binder you should use on whatever type of meat, and some people recommend just not using it at all and just relying on the moisture from the cryovac bag for the rub to stick to. I've never done a back-to-back test before, so I thought in this video I'd finally do a test and test some common slathers like mustard and soy sauce and oil, and also test one that's not so common, mayonnaise, just to see what will happen. So to test it out, I'm starting with 2 choice grade briskets. To trim it, I'm just removing it from the cryovac bag and slicing down one side. Then I flip it around and slice off about 1 inch on the other side. I slice down the flap on the point, and then I cut down the thin edge of the flat and I round it out a little bit while I'm doing so. I slice down the deposit of fat where the seam fat transitions into the fat cap on the flat, and then I slice the fat cap down to about 1/4 inch. Flipping it over, I'm now slicing down the seam fat just a little bit, not too much. These days I leave most of it on, and I also actually leave the silver skin on the bottom. I didn't used to, but I find removing it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Then I repeat that with the second brisket, and we're ready to slather or bind or whatever you want to call it. Now I'm wrapping half of the brisket in plastic wrap to keep things clean, and I'm applying my first binder to the flat of brisket number 1. This is just basic soy sauce, and it's what I use on most of my briskets. Not this particular brand. I often switch up brands, and sometimes I use seasoning sauce and seasoned soy sauce, but it's all very similar. I find that it adds a little bit of umami flavor and salt, but to be honest, I've never tested it back to back like this, so I'm really interested to see how it compares to other binders. Now I'm moving the plastic wrap to the other side of the brisket and applying the second binder to the point. This is vegetable oil. It's canola oil to be specific. I use canola oil a lot because I live in Canada, and we grow a lot of it up here in Canada, so it's pretty common, but you can use corn oil, or you can use vegetable oil, which is really just a mixture of different types of oil, or you can really use any type of oil, just not motor oil, obviously. After that's applied, we have soy sauce on the flat, oil on the point, and we have a bald spot in the middle for comparison, where I don't apply any binder at all. That bald spot just has the moisture from being in the cryovac bag, which is probably more than enough for the rub to stick to be honest. Now for the second brisket, I'm slathering the flat side with mustard, which is a very popular binder for lots of different types of barbecued meats. I've used a lot of it in the past, and I find it really helps the rub stick to the meat because it's thick and sticky, but beyond that, I haven't really found that it makes much of a difference in terms of flavor or taste or the bark or anything like that. Now for the point side, I'm using mayonnaise. I've never used this as a binder before, but it has a similar consistency to mustard, and it probably will help the rub stick a little bit better. It also has more fat in it, and it has more of an acidic tang, so it'll be interesting to see if that does anything or if those flavors carry through to the final product. Once again, the middle of the brisket will be kept plain for comparison. Now moving on to rubbing, I'll be using Smoke Trail's barbecue brisket rub on these briskets. You can get it from Amazon in the US, giving it a nice heavy layer on the bottom and sides, and then I'm flipping it over and giving it a heavy rub on the top of the brisket. I noticed the rub sticks really well to the mustard and mayo areas, but it didn't adhere as well comparatively to the middle where there's no binder, which was interesting. So at first blush, it looks like these binders are doing a good job of getting the rub to really stick to the meat, but it still stuck to that bald spot pretty well. Then I applied the rub to the soy sauce and oil brisket, and once again, it looks like the binder areas, which have more moisture or oil, and the bald spot in the middle has less rub sticking to it, but still probably enough rub. At first glance, it also looks like the mustard and mayo brisket held on to more rub than this brisket, which is unsurprising because mustard and mayo are very thick and sticky, but it kind of raises the question, Does more rub stuck to your brisket equal a better brisket? I think that's up for you to decide, but we'll also be able to compare the results at the end of this video. Now I'm placing both briskets on my Oklahoma Joe's Longhorn offset smoker. The one up front is the mustard mayo brisket, and the one in the back is the soy sauce oil brisket. I'm running the smoker at 250 degrees for the first 5 hours of the cook. 5 hours later, I'm opening the lid and having a look at these briskets. Mustard mayo brisket looks nice and dark and barky, and the soy sauce oil brisket looks pretty much exactly the same. At this point, the briskets are getting sweaty at around 140 degrees internal, so I'm going to start running my fire a bit hotter at around 300 degrees Fahrenheit because the briskets can take the higher heat at this stage of the cook. 8 hours later, the briskets look like this, very briskety and dark. I don't really notice a difference between the two or between different areas of the brisket. They're temping at around 170, so I'm wrapping them in foil boats to help them cook more evenly, and now I'm placing them back on the smoker. 12 hours later, the briskets are probing at least 195 internal everywhere I probe, and the fat caps are getting nice and squishy. So I'm removing them from the smoker, and they're going on top of some aluminum foil with tallow and clarified butter. I'm wrapping them up really tightly, and then they're going in my holding oven at 150 degrees Fahrenheit for the next 18 hours until dinner the next day. All right, guys, it's the next day, and I have both briskets here. The first brisket here is the one with the mayonnaise on the point, and it has the mustard on the flat. The second brisket I have here is with the oil on the point and the soy sauce on the flat. So the first one I'm gonna test out is brisket number 1, and we'll see if that mayonnaise and mustard actually did anything. Let's start by taking a look at the bark. I mean, this looks pretty good. All of the rub has applied really well to the exterior on the point as well as the flat. I don't see a noticeable difference. And just poking around the edges here, everything looks the same to me, guys. So maybe because mustard and mayonnaise are both so chunky and thick, they both kind of created the same effect, but even that narrow band in the middle where there was no binder at all, it looks pretty similar to everything else. So what I'm gonna be looking at now is whether there's a taste difference. Okay, let's cut this guy right down the middle. So right where that empty bald spot is, where I didn't put any binder at all on the brisket. And before I rub this in tallow, I will give you guys a close-up. Ooh, it's looking pretty good. Now, if we get right up close, that's where the mayonnaise is, and it's pretty much rendered all the way down with the fat. The fat is rendered down. So I'm not really seeing anything to suggest the mayonnaise has done anything differently than just plain water would have. And then on the mustard side, I mean, I'm also not really seeing any difference here. So let's just get some tallow on there. And I'll do a couple of slices here because we're probably still on the bald spot. Oh, that was a really bad slice. Really bad slice. So let's get down to the area where the mustard binder is. Okay, so this is one of the slices with the mustard binder. It looks pretty good. That's really good. I also haven't had lunch yet, so anything tastes good to me right now. It's good, no complaints. I really have nothing to say about it. Let's take a look at the point here. So this is...
All right, car keys in your pocket.
My wife forgot her car keys.
No, you took my car keys.
I took her car keys. Yeah, let me clarify. I don't have them in my pocket.
They're in your pocket? Okay, I'll check your jacket.
Okay, where was I? All right, so taking a look at the point here, this is where we use the oil as a binder. I'm gonna slice right around here. So this chunk I will chunk up into burnt ends. And let's do a couple of slices here. We'll do one. I'll get a nice thick slice. And I'll give you guys a look. It's looking pretty nice. The bark looks absolutely amazing. We'll pull that apart. I think it's gonna be a good one. It's really good, it's really smoky. I don't taste any flavor difference at all. Maybe the flat was a little bit saltier. That's the only flavor difference I can really detect. Okay, we're moving on to brisket number 2. This is the brisket that I prepared with the oil on the point and the soy sauce on the flat. We'll cut this right down the middle. And I'll give you guys a look. It's looking very nice. Let's start with the point this time. So let's cut the burnt ends away. And then we'll do a couple of slices. Again, this is with the oil used as a binder. Let's take a look. It looks like there's kind of less bark There's less thick bark, but that could just be because there's less fat on this particular brisket. We'll pull that apart, pulls apart perfectly. I'm gonna taste some of this bark. It tastes about the same as the last brisket, but the bark is crispier. That's the only real thing that I notice. And I'm just gonna make another slice into here because I have a theory here, and I think, yep, this fat cap is a lot better rendered than the last one, and I think that might have been because of the oil. The oil helped to render it down. And now last but not least, let's take a look at the flat, which was prepared with the soy sauce as a binder. That's normally what I use as a binder for most of my briskets. I find it adds a little bit more flavor, but let's see if it actually made a difference here. Now I'm gonna slice a couple slices in because you guys will recall that there was that bald spot in the middle of the brisket where we didn't have any binder. So I'll just go maybe 4 or 5 slices in. And I'll give you guys a look. The bark looks really nice and dark. You can see that the fat cap isn't as well rendered, which is pretty typical for the flat. The fat cap on the flat doesn't get as well rendered as the point because the point is directly exposed to the fire. We'll pull that guy apart. Nice and easy. This actually tastes better. Yeah, it tastes a little bit better because the fat cap isn't as rendered down all the way to the meat as the point was, and it has a little bit more gelatinous fat to it, as well as that sort of caramelly yellow, fully rendered top part. So you bite into that, it's sweet, but you also get that gelatinous bite of fat that kind of coats your tongue. And it's also tastier. It has that distinct soy sauce flavor that just adds a little bit of umami to each bite. Even though I prefer point slices, this flat slice was actually my favorite bite that I've had in this video so far. So I think I'm gonna stick with the soy sauce binder, to be honest. It adds a little bit more flavor. The oil might render down the fat cap a little bit too much, but it could have its place if you were, for example, wrapping your brisket earlier in the cook and you're not cooking all the way until the brisket is done, uncovered like you saw me do in this video, where it gets maximum exposure to all that heat and the fat cap renders down all the way. So to quickly recap, using oil as a binder might have some sort of impact in helping you to render down the fat cap on your brisket more effectively and create a crunchier texture. Soy sauce adds a lot more salt and umami flavor, and it's my personal favorite, and mustard and mayonnaise didn't really make that much of a difference in my opinion on the end product, but they were the most effective at helping the rub stick at the early stages of the cook. If you guys have any other ideas for Smoke Lab videos, let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to subscribe to the Oklahoma Joe's YouTube channel, and I will see you in the next video. Happy smoking.